Keanu Reeves had always shared a love for simple, kind gestures. Despite their fame, they never lost touch with the real world. One evening they found themselves at a quiet, old-fashioned hotel in New Orleans, a place recommended to them for its charm and history. After a long day of filming, they sat in the hotel's dimly lit restaurant, enjoying a quiet dinner. The walls were decorated with black and white photos of old Hollywood stars, and a grand piano played soft jazz in the corner. The place had an elegant yet nostalgic feel, but not everyone inside shared the warmth. As Sandra sipped her wine, her attention was drawn to a young girl outside the large window. The girl, no older than 10, had messy hair and worn-out clothes. She pressed her little hands against the glass, staring hungrily at the plates of food being served inside. Sandra's heart ached. She immediately signaled for the waiter, an older man wearing a crisp red shirt, his name tag reading, Carl. "Excuse me," Sandra said kindly, "could you bring a plate of food for that little girl outside?" Carl frowned, clearly unimpressed. He scoffed, "Ma'am, this is a fine dining establishment. We don't just hand out free meals like some charity." Sandra's smile faltered. "She looks hungry. It wouldn't hurt to help her, would it?" Carl shook his head, rolling his eyes. "If we start feeding one, they'll all come running. That's not how business works, lady." Keanu, who had been silent up until now, set his fork down. His sharp eyes studied the waiter, his usual calm demeanor now carrying an unmistakable edge. He leaned back in his chair and spoke in a low but firm voice. "That lady you're speaking to is Sandra Bullock, and she's offering to pay for the meal. So tell me, is business so good that you can afford to insult paying customers?" Carl's face turned red, but he crossed his arms defiantly. "Rules are rules." Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. "I love rules, but you know what I love more? Respect and kindness. You might want to try it sometime." Then, Keanu reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and placed it on the table. "That should cover her meal. And here's a little something extra in case she wants dessert." Carl hesitated, looking between the money and Keanu's intense stare. Finally, with a reluctant sigh, he snatched up the bill and disappeared into the kitchen. Minutes later, a steaming plate of pasta and a piece of chocolate cake were brought outside to the little girl. Sandra stepped out and handed it to her personally. "Here you go, sweetheart," she said, kneeling beside her. "Eat up, okay?" The girl's eyes lit up as she took her first bite, and for the first time that night, Sandra felt the warmth she had been missing in that cold, stuffy restaurant. When Sandra returned to the table, Keanu smirked at her. "You always find a way to make the world a little better, don't you?" She grinned. "Takes one to know one." Meanwhile, Carl, the waiter in the red shirt, stood by the bar, watching with a strange expression. He didn't say a word, but something in his face had shifted. Maybe, just maybe, he had learned something that night. As Sandra and Keanu left the restaurant, hand in hand, they didn't need to say anything more. Their actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. And somewhere in the city, a little girl went to bed with a full stomach and a heart warmed by kindness. What do you think? I wanted to keep that perfect mix of drama, heart, and classic Keanu Bullock chemistry. As Sandra and Keanu stepped out of the hotel, the cool night air greeted them. The streets of New Orleans shimmered under the golden glow of streetlights, and the distant sound of a saxophone played from a nearby jazz club. The little girl, now happily eating her meal on the sidewalk, looked up at them with bright eyes. "Thank you, miss," she said softly, her voice full of gratitude. Sandra knelt down beside her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lucy," the girl replied between bites of chocolate cake. "Lucy, where are your parents?" Sandra asked gently, concern etching her face. Lucy hesitated, looking down at her plate. I don't know. My mom used to work at a diner, but she lost her job, and we had to leave our apartment. She told me to wait for her near the hotel, but she hasn't come back yet." Keanu's face darkened. He glanced at Sandra, and she already knew what he was thinking. They couldn't just leave Lucy alone. Sandra squeezed Lucy's small hands. "Listen, we're going to help you, okay? We'll find your mom." Lucy's eyes filled with hope. Keanu stood up and looked back at the hotel. He spotted Carl, the grumpy waiter in the red shirt, still standing near the entrance, pretending not to watch them. "Hey, Carl," Keanu called out, his voice carrying a sharp edge. The old waiter flinched but slowly walked toward them. What do you want now? Keanu folded his arms. You know this city, don't you? Carl scoffed. Lived here my whole life. Why? Keanu nodded toward Lucy. Her mom is missing. Do you know any shelters or places where she might be? Carl's face softened for the first time that evening. He glanced down at Lucy, then sighed. There's a women's shelter a few blocks away. Sometimes moms in tough spots go there with their kids. I can take you there if you want. Sandra's eyebrows lifted in surprise. You'd really do that? Carl looked away, shuffling awkwardly. Look, I may be an old grump, but I ain't heartless. Keanu smirked. Could have fooled me. Carl rolled his eyes. All right, let's go before I change my mind. The four of them walked together through the quiet streets. Lucy held on to Sandra's hand tightly, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. When they reached the shelter, a kind woman at the front desk gasped, Lucy, your mother's been looking for you all night. A few moments later, a tired but relieved woman rushed out from one of the rooms. Lucy! Mom! Lucy ran into her mother's arms, tears streaming down both their faces. Sandra and Keanu watched the reunion, their hearts full. Even Carl, the grumpy old waiter, looked away and rubbed his eyes as if he had something in them. As they left the shelter, Sandra turned to Carl. You're not so bad after all, Carl. He grumbled. Yeah. Just don't go telling people I've got a soft spot. I've got a reputation to maintain. Keanu chuckled. Your secret's safe with us. They parted ways, and as Keanu and Sandra walked back through the quiet streets, hand in hand, Sandra looked up at him with a smile. You always know how to handle things, don't you? She teased. Keanu smirked. I just follow your lead. And with that, they disappeared into the night. Two Hollywood stars who had just changed a little girl's life, not with money or fame, but with kindness. And that was worth more than anything. Hope you liked the continuation. Let me know if you want more. As Keanu and Sandra walked back toward their hotel, the city of New Orleans hummed with life around them. Street musicians played soulful jazz on the corners, and the scent of beignets and coffee drifted from late-night cafes. The night had taken an unexpected turn, but neither of them regretted a single moment. Sandra glanced at Keanu. You know, we just wrapped up a scene today where I had to give this emotional speech about hope. But this felt real. Keanu smiled. Yeah, because it was real. You gave Lucy more than food tonight. You gave her a chance to believe in people again. Sandra nudged him playfully. Oh, and you didn't? Keanu chuckled. I just played backup to your lead role. As they reached the entrance of their hotel, they were surprised to see Carl, the old waiter in the red shirt leaning against the wall, smoking a cigarette. His usual grumpy expression softened as he looked at them. You two really meant all that back there, huh? Carl muttered. Sandra crossed her arms. Of course we did. Why? Carl exhaled slowly. I guess it just hit me. I used to be the kind of guy who cared. Used to work at a soup kitchen with my wife. Then she passed, and I guess I got tired of everything. Stop trying. Keanu's eyes softened. Losing someone you love changes you. Carl nodded. Yeah, and after a while you start thinking kindness is just a fairy tale. But tonight, you two made me remember what it felt like. Sandra reached out and touched his arm. It's never too late to start caring again, Carl. Carl took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. He held it out to Keanu. For the kid, Carl said, clearing his throat. Next time you see someone like her, buy them a meal from me. Keanu took the bill with a small smile, folding it carefully. I will. Carl nodded, then flicked his cigarette away and headed inside without another word. Sandra watched him go, shaking her head. Well, would you look at that? We just made a grumpy old waiter believe in kindness again. Keanu grinned. Who's keeping score? She linked her arm with his. We should. And with that, they disappeared into the hotel, their hearts a little fuller, their faith in humanity a little stronger. That night, somewhere in New Orleans, a little girl slept soundly in her mother's arms, and an old man in a red shirt lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to be kind again. The end. That wraps up the story beautifully. What do you think?